Light is one of the key concepts of the 12 concepts that make up a healthy home. But it's really important to know not only how to enhance light for maximum health, but also how to protect yourself against bad light. In this episode of the Healthy Home Podcast, I speak to Dr. Shelley James, and we discuss the key strategies of how to optimize light in your home and your life. We also discuss the dangers of light pollution and the effect that that has on not only human beings, but on animals as well. And of course, we couldn't have an episode on light without discussing blue light and technology and the risks that that has, particularly on children. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Dr. Shelley James, thank you so much for joining us on the Healthy Home Podcast. You're known as the Light Lady, which is such a great name. How did you come by that?
Well, it's an absolute privilege to be here to say that to start with. It's actually my brother Jim, who's a PR specialist, and he was saying, "Shell, you need a hook, you need something." And he said, "What about the Light Lady?" And I thought, yeah, that works. So it was really thanks to him. I think it's always very hard to see yourself as other people see you, and it's also hard to sell yourself sometimes. So he's been by my side, making sure that I keep gunning along with those sorts of tricks.
So you're an expert on light and how it affects human health, and particularly in relation to the built environment and our homes and our office spaces. Can you tell me a bit about how natural light does affect our human health and, the main benefits of ensuring light in our living and work spaces is optimized?
Yes. Well, how long have you got? So I think there is something very special about natural light compared to artificial light. And I'm just going to begin perhaps by making the analogy of an orange. I know you're in Spain, so you have a gorgeous orange. With the imagine that all the ways that it engages your senses, both your visual senses and your sense of smell, and a whole bunch of sort of micronutrients in that, and your access to that, and the way it delivers all that in a sort of a perfectly balanced package. Whereas a light bulb is like, even the best light bulbs really are like sort of good quality bottled orange juice, perhaps from concentrate. It's got all the bits in it. You can even fortify it with extra stuff, which now light bulbs do. But essentially, it's missing the context of enjoying it. It's also missing something about the time of day when you would consume it. So when we think about how we evolved, we can think that there are two different pathways or two different broad dimensions of our experience of light. One of them is to do with vision, and we evolved under the sun to spot movement and patterns and important things in the world. So light which delivers the range of wavelengths in a kind of balanced way, going back to the orange, it delivers all of that in ways that our brain is evolved to kind of take shortcuts for. It's a steady, balanced, evenly contrasted light source, and most of the natural things around us are designed to, or evolved to, reflect back the wavelengths to us. So that's the visual pathway, and it's got a bunch of the way the wavelengths are interacting with your visual system are very unique and help, for example, young children to grow correctly. It helps with hand-eye coordination, a bunch of stuff. It starts from very early on. The second way that light affects us is to do with what we call a non-visual pathway, which is at the top layer of the retina, discovered very recently. Turns out to be projecting to the center of the brain. In fact, I always have a brain with me. So we say that your visual pathway is projecting to the back. This is your visual cortex. Turns out that there is, so it kind of travels through, crosses, and comes up here, and then all sorts of information. It sort of sorts stuff out, and then it comes to the front bit here, which says, oh, that's an apple or an orange. It turns out there's a second pathway which goes to this central section, which regulates mood, it regulates your sleep-wake cycle, it regulates attention. So a lot of attention has been recently paid to the way that light and darkness triggers a whole series of hormone responses which get you ready to go to sleep or get you ready to wake up. And light which allows that top layer, those retinal ganglion cells, to communicate with that kind of what we call the non-visual pathway or the non-image forming pathway, is a second really critical dimension. And we call that circadian lighting. So it's the cycle of light and darkness, which says, oh, it's time to wake up, and oh, it's time to go to rest. And when the light that we're getting in the environment doesn't give us enough contrast or continues through the night, that hormone balance starts to kind of free run. It starts to go off kilter and starts to make us very, very unwell and very unhappy.
So I've heard that, if you're not exposed to enough natural light in the morning, or contrary to that, if you're exposed to too much artificial light or blue light in the evening, then is it true that your melatonin doesn't kick in, and that's what we rely on to kind of help us wind down to go to sleep?
So yes, I mean, essentially that non-visual system that we're learning more and more about what it needs. But the basic principle is that in the morning, to let your body clock know that it's time to wake up, if you're working during the day, you need to give it a good solid burst of bright light, optimally daylight, because it's got a bunch of other wavelengths in it that artificial light, just like our box of orange juice, just doesn't deliver. So ideally you get that in the morning, and then in the evening that reduced levels of light, particularly when it's contrasted with good levels of light during the day, so reducing and into darkness, allows a whole bunch of hormones, including melatonin, because we're learning more and more about how some people, including us slightly older ones, we don't necessarily generate very much melatonin. So it's part of an overall sort of basket of signals to your brain that that it's time to rest. And in younger people, people your age and younger, that melatonin response is nice and strong. We see that rising, but medications, stress, a bunch of other neurals, dementia, a bunch of stuff eats away at that particular signaling pathway. So we talk about melatonin, and it's been a useful kind of proxy or signal of that the body clock is in train, but it's not. More and more understanding that it's not it doesn't equal sleep.
Okay, so it's not just about melatonin. There's a whole kind of basket of other hormones that are being affected at the same time. Okay,
Exactly.
that's great to know. And when we're talking about artificial light, is artificial light always blue light? Or is it mainly blue lights? And we're hearing more and more about how being on our devices and computers and even watching TV like late at night before you go to bed is really bad for like optimizing your sleep. So what would you recommend that we do to change that?
Great question. So LED. So there are different types of light bulb, but essentially the light bulbs that we are encouraged to use now, or the light sources that we're encouraged to use now, and in fact the old ones are being phased out completely, they are light emitting diodes. And the way that works is that the manufacturers engineer a semiconductor chip, and they run electrons across that, and as the electrons run across this chip, they give off photons, and those photons are guided up through layers of dye, which change the wavelengths in that light. Now, the cheapest, the one which looks brightest, where you get the most perceived brightness for the amount of energy that puts in, is blue. So the cheaper LEDs and the brighter LEDs, like headlamps, they've got they're engineered to put lots and lots of blue wavelengths out. But more and more great engineers are now able to tune the wavelengths coming out of a light source. So it doesn't necessarily, there are some great ones which got loads of blue in to wake you up, and there are others which are designed to give little or no blue. So so that's modulating that non-visual, that kind of wake up pathway in interesting ways. So we think they've all got blue in them, but actually they don't necessarily need to. And you'll see that some light bulbs look kind of bluish, and some of them look yellowish. Your brain is very easily tricked. So you're looking for a light bulb which says it's got a good full spectrum, and that's more likely to give you a balanced diet of wavelengths coming out.
Okay, so that's interesting.
To answer the second part of your question, so in the evening, what I said earlier is that what we're looking for is a good contrast between lots of light during the day, brightness first, and then the wavelengths kind of give that other psychological things like, wow, it's bright, it's cool, it's fresh. But then in the evening, if you're looking at a screen, initially people thought that it was the screen, it was the blue coming off the screen, and yes, that doesn't help. But the main thing is actually, if you're on your screen, it's because you're watching a telly, you're talking to somebody, you're playing a video game. So you're giving your brain a bunch of other signals. I mentioned that basket was that it needs to be, there's an opportunity there. So it's going to stay, you're going to maintain alertness in a way. So a recent study looked at the difference between a book and a screen for reading with the same material, and actually found that the problem really was the activity, not the light itself.
That's super interesting, actually. I've been wondering that myself recently because, my sleep hasn't been great over the last kind of year or so. So obviously I'm kind of trialing loads of different things. And sometimes I find like watching television at night kind of helps me relax. But I've noticed like more and more that I definitely can't watch anything that's more than a little bit exciting. Like, I've got a friend that's obsessed with like horror movies, and she's always like, let's watch a horror movie. I'm like, are you joking? Not before we go to sleep, because I can feel my cortisol or something rising anyway, which is obviously not gonna help my sleep patterns. But I never thought about the fact that that the subject matter about what you're looking at is just as important as maybe the blue light and the devices. I've started personally to kind of start turning all my lamps down in the home, like about 2 hours before I go to sleep, and then maybe using candlelight to kind of set the mood and try and convince my body to go to sleep better. But sometimes I'm wondering whether I'm actually doing more harm to my eyes like that. What do you think about my plan, my night plan?
Yeah, you won't be doing them more harm than good. I mean, if you're kind of trying to read a book that's small, but actually what we can see, if you look at somebody like Jim Quick, is really great about how you set up your memory and your learning. And actually what we find is that if you can review the thoughts for the day, what you learnt, I've got a little checklist that I use in the evening, and actually plan your day, sketch out. It can be a really creative, thoughtful learning time to get yourself ready for the next day, so that everything is set so that when you wake up, you're ready to go. So, and I mean, things like audiobooks are great. So there's lots and lots of other ways of giving your eyes a break in the evening, which include things like sketching or making stuff or reviewing or writing, because when you're writing, you're in charge of the scale of the writing. So you're likely to write at a slightly larger scale in the evening, just because then you can see it more clearly. When you're working with a book, then it's a much more difficult thing to do.
Yeah, that's a great idea. You said you set your alarm to remind yourself to go outside. How often do you set that?
So first thing in the morning, I get up, do my teeth, and go outside for a kind of a really brisk walk. It's my little bit of high impact training, but it also gives me that blue hour. And then I go for a swim at the sea, so that gives me another burst of that. But then I set it at 12:30, just to make sure, because that's a time when I'm working and I kind of forget, and then suddenly I find it's 2 o'clock and I haven't been outside. So I do one at 2, and then I do one at 5, and then I have another one at 7, which says switch off. So because when we work for ourselves, or even when you're working from home, even if you've got people coming in and out, it's tempting to keep going. So I set those alarms, and then I have another one at 9 o'clock which says get ready for bed, and that allows me to structure my day. I can always say buzz off to the alarm, as I did just now, but it does remind me of a commitment that I have to make sure that I get enough light. And I can't talk about this, I can't get bang on about it if I'm not actually doing that myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's good to know. I think, technology is useful for something, right? I always set my alarm in the evening as well, to be like, okay, this is the end of the day. Come off your devices, turn off the phone. I really like to turn my phone off, like, at least a couple of hours before I go to bed, because otherwise you can catch yourself being on WhatsApp messages or whatever until like 11 o'clock, and then wondering why you're not like winding down and going to sleep properly. But I wanted to ask you actually, I hear changing the subject a little bit. I read so much in the interiors world about biophilic design at the moment. So Oliver Heath talks a lot about biophilic design. But I'm reading more and more about biophilic lighting design. Is that a term that you use yourself? And how have you seen changes in lighting within the interiors world? And are there any new and exciting projects and products coming up that we should be implementing in our homes?
Great question. I mean, I think the word biophilic is loaded with, in the same way that human-centric is loaded with all sorts of associations. So it's not a word I necessarily use, but I think it's a principle that good lighting does apply. So we're mentioning, I mean, the whole principle of biophilia is that it's an environment which reminds us or kind of helps us to stay connected with the natural world. And there are a few things that we know about light and the quality of light and dynamic quality of light in the natural world. And one of them is to do with the way that light is arranged around a space. So a biophilic or kind of a natural lighting scheme is likely to create high level layers of light and high level lights which tend to be kind of more diffuse and cooler, essentially, to kind of create what they call a sky dome experience. And there we're seeing more and more luminaires which allow you to bring some light points down, but also it washes the ceiling. So that allows us to create that sky dome feeling. And actually you can even have a cooler light going above and then sort of a slightly warmer light coming down. And our brains seem to manage that very happily. You think, oh, that's weird, but actually it seems to be fine. So we can enhance that sense of sky by increasing the reflectance of the ceiling. If your ceiling is flat enough, you can increase your perception of the brightness in a space by up to 20%, sort of reduce energy use also in that way by choosing reflectances of the ceiling, for example, to enhance that sense of, uplift, really. So the other thing that lighting, so we talk about sort of the way that layers of light, as you would, if you look out of the window, our ideal layers of view is about 3 layers. So you've got sky, you've got a middle distance and a shorter distance. And those are when we analyze the quality of view that people prefer, that seems to be it. And it's absolutely possible to create those 3 layers of lighting in a space. So you have a higher level light, you have a kind of a task light, and then a sort of other decorative lights around the space. So you can replicate, you can use lighting and the position of light and the qualities of light to create that biophilic, sort of that natural pattern of light and shade in a space. Something else you can do, which is, and I think now new kinds of LEDs are allowing us to do, is to integrate miniaturization, for example, allows us to place luminaires or spots and things. I'm not a giant fan of spots always, but there are some great tracks now, for example, with really beautiful, small, beautifully designed spots which allow you to kind of highlight biophilic kind of qualities in the space. So if you've got a brick wall or a plant like mine, in the evening I've got lights in there and just kind of, it becomes a little jungle. And so you can use light to emphasize, even if you've only got room for a pot plant in your flat and you rent the flat, putting one of the, an IKEA clip-on lamp in there will kind of highlight the quality of the kind of the natural dynamics. So I think there's one other thing I might mention, which is that our experience of natural light is that it's always changing. The cloud goes over, there's all that sort of stuff. So there are new kind of lighting systems which are getting more and more accessible to us all, which essentially change color quality across the course of the day. There are some lovely skylights, we've sort of fake skylights, for example, which kind of they play the day out. They play a day, and that can be. I've seen some beautiful work in basements, for example, where putting some skylights in there and they're bright enough to sort of almost create like a pool of light that people sit under when they're waiting to go in to see a doctor or something. So I think there is more and more the technology, LED technology, tunable technology, miniaturization is allowing us to be more and more kind of reflect the way that lighting can help us to feel connected with nature in comfortable and sustainable ways.
Yeah, great. I mean, When I was looking at putting some different lighting into my home recently, and one of my concerns is because I speak a lot about kind of radiation and EMF radiation and electrodomestic radiation, and I always have a little bit of worry when about dimmers and also about flicker lighting, basically. So I bought some of these lovely little, they're more like a red bulb from Bon Charge that I use in the evening to kind of, well, to calm my body down, but also to read to at nighttime. But I wonder what your kind of view is on dimmer switches, because of course they're useful because they can kind of change the mood in the space well throughout the day and also kind of make it darker at nighttime when we're kind of trying to relax a bit more. But I did read quite a lot that they give off quite a lot of radiation, like electrodomestic radiation or EMF radiation, whichever one it is. So yeah, what's your view on those?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, I think that a good quality luminaire and a good quality dimmer switch that are designed to go together. I mean, light bulbs, some of them are designed to dim and some of them aren't because of the way that they manage the energy running across the chip. So people kind of don't understand the difference necessarily. And then your bog standard dimmer switch isn't very sophisticated in the way that it manages the power. So what you've got is the energy's coming, the power's the electricity coming in through to the wall. It's an alternating current. There's loads of it. It's like like a giant fire hose. And the dimmer switch needs to take that and transform that into direct current. So it chops it up and sends it along the line to the light bulb, which then needs to kind of feed it in little bits across that chip. So there's just a bunch of any bit between the way that dimmer switch chops up the power, the connections between there and the light bulb, and then the quality of engineering in the light bulb itself, that can all introduce flicker and that horrible sort of nasty buzzing sound that you get. So I'm a great fan of simply choosing a light bulb for the brightness that you need, and then shifting. So I've got quite bright overhead lights in my kitchen, and then I've got under cabinet lights. So if I just turn the overhead ones on, I mean, it is on, the other ones are on a dimmer, the overhead ones, but actually it's not working very well, so just leave it on full. So I'm a great fan. And then I've got desk lamps, which they're all adjustable, so I just kind of turn them against the wall, there are ways of shifting the settings, which maybe involve the energy of the physical energy of a light switch, but engaging with your environment like that is in the same way that you would kind of light a candle when a friend's coming around. Those things are, I think, dimming is problematic if it's not really, really well done.
Right. Okay. And if someone's just starting out with looking at their lighting in their home, and they're just thinking about the basics of like an overhead light, what kind of wattage or what kind of bulb should they be looking at? I mean, there's so many different ones, right? I never really understand personally the difference between incandescent, LED. I'm going to assume we won't be able to get incandescent very much longer. But yeah, what should we be looking at first?
Yeah. So LED is the name for light emitting diode, and that it's such an efficient way of generating light that in the future you won't be able to really buy anything else. So when somebody says LED, it's like saying it's a car. It's not. But the next thing to think about is yes, it's brightness. And obviously a light bulb that's a long way away it's like thinking about a loudspeaker, or volume on a loudspeaker. Something that's a long way away, you're going to hear less of it. It's the same with light. So there's an inverse square law from where the light bulb is to where it reaches you. So what you need to be looking at, depending on the size of your room, you're looking for I'm just going to roll back a second as well, because the old-fashioned light bulbs, they were the number was watts. So how much electricity is running down and heating up the wire in there. That's why it's called incandescent. It was glowing. But with an LED, what you're looking at is the amount of light that's coming out. It's called the lumens. And so the lumens is what's coming out, and then the lux is what reaches you, if that makes sense. Yeah. So and the numbers now have completely gone out of my head. What you're looking for is I'll send you a link to
yeah.
I'll send you a link to some to a little thing that I wrote actually a while ago on the numbers you should be looking at. In fact, there is some of that in my book.
Yes.
So
I was going to come on to your book next. Thank you. Yeah, no, sure. We'll put notes to that basically afterwards. That's cool. I just know it's something that I struggle with personally. I'll go into kind of like the electricians to go and choose a bulb. I'm like, it's a bit kind of like overwhelm over what you choose.
I'll gladly share. I mean, there's a chapter here, and there's a QR code to go to that chapter, and I'll gladly share that with your audience so that they can just go and find all the information there, because it talks about which light bulbs to buy, what the bases look like, what the names are, what color rendering means, all the other things that they might find, because it's quite a technical conversation, and it's probably easier to just read it and then ferry it around to find what you want. So I'll do that. I'll just share
absolutely brilliant. Can you tell us the name of the book? Sorry, I know you've written 2 books. I was going to ask you.
This is called Light Your Essential Survival Guide.
Perfect. Boost sleep, mood, memory. Excellent.
Well, those are all the things that people ask me about most. I mean, you talked about your problem with sleep. As we get people with kids, or actually as we get a bit older, then memory starts to be a bit of an issue. And if you're thinking about learning, that's an issue. And then certainly my nieces and others around me really struggle with seasonal affective disorder. And what do we know about the way the light affects us? And you're over there in Spain, so you're getting a bit less of an issue than us who were kind of hanging on in here in the north of Europe. So those are the things that people ask me about. And then the other thing that I realized that people didn't know was kind of how the eye and brain work. So I put some stuff in about that. And then just as you just done there, what should I buy? So I chucked some stuff in about that. So it's a summary of the main things people ask me about, with loads and loads of academic references, and each one at the end of each chapter has got a QR code, so you can go away and kind of find the original sources yourself.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, one of the questions I always get asked is normally about how to address the issue around blue light of all our teenagers and kids that are on kind of devices all day long. And, are there any kind of tricks or strategies to help with that? Because, I mean, even if you are, I don't have children myself, but I know friends that they have real difficulties in getting their kids off of these devices, like any time of day, let alone at nighttime. But I'm just wondering whether, is there a strategy to it? What are the tips in your book that are applied to children that you think parents should be considering, really?
Yeah, actually, that brings me on to the second. So I did write something which is more specific for parents, because it was really written for my sister and her kids. So essentially, there are a couple of things that you can think about. In fact, at the end of each chapter in this one, I put kind of killer arguments that my nieces go, all right then, because mum and dad can bang on about it, but actually they need arguments which work for them. So my nieces are very they want to do well at school, and they want to do well at sports. So you can share information with them just to help them to understand the implications of staying on their phones all the time. The other thing you can do is to demonstrate yourself. I so often see parents saying, "Get off your phone," and they're still typing. It's like, wait a minute. So I think, and you see parents on with prams, or at restaurants with. So I think setting some ground rules where you demonstrate what that looks like. We need to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And I think the other thing is that what I see is that we need to offer kids something else which is as good. You need to earn their time and their attention. So saying get off your phone and then giving them nothing else interesting to do is not a solution. So get off your phone, let's go for a bike ride, or let's go for a walk, or let's and there's no reason not to use the technology to kind of map read, or there are lots of other things, or go into astronomy, or there are lots of ways to use the technology which they're not going to get off it. And actually, for lots of kids, it's their window on the world, and there's no reason to be without it. So that would be my tip, is to help them to understand what it's doing for them, or like what it means for them. Demonstrate yourself, and then also give them some other techniques or strategies for managing that. And one of the things that I've seen with with people around me is that they say, "Oh, mum won't let me have the phone on in the evening," and actually, it's a relief for them. So being a bit strict gives them a kind of a boundary, and you need to police that. You need to hold fast yourself and actually get off the phone yourself.
Okay, yeah. And does the data show that exposure to blue light and devices is worse for children than it is for adults?
Yes, really, because as we get older, our eyes aren't as clear. We don't get not as much light goes in, basically, because that gets a bit yellow, and the front of our eyes never opens quite as much as it does as a
Hmm.
child. You kind of see kids with their kind of giant sorts of eyes, and they get, I mean, up to some orders of magnitude twice as much light in their eyes as an older person. So blue light, particularly that high energy wavelengths, kind of do go in. And the other thing that happens is that because their eyes are much more flexible and open more quickly, if they're watching the telly or watching a bright screen in a dark room, their eyes, that pupil opens wide and lets in loads of more wavelengths than it should. So and so
Well, you
they're
get
more
square
limited.
eyes.
Yeah.
My mother always used to say to me, "Don't sit near the telly, you're going to get square eyes." And I was like, I was always trying to imagine that, thinking, really?
I mean, the other thing is that that you do see them looking, sitting really close. And the other thing that happens is that not only does it that there is some French research which suggests that actually this kind of says what they call a phototoxic effect. Particularly, toys designed for children are sort of, they weren't designed to be looked at. You see little kids sort of peeping in very closely to stuff, and it's that there is a real risk of them harming their eyes permanently by not only by having too much blue light, that kind of single wavelength, very high intensity light, but also by not getting outside enough. So they've seen, there's a great giant study in China which is able to reduce myopia by 40% by giving kids 90 minutes outside. They just went outside for their break times.
Wow.
And so it's not only the amount of blue light they're getting, particularly at the wrong time of day, but particularly the lack of proper daylight they're getting.
Mm.
on
Yeah,
that.
that's super interesting. And yeah, I mean, on that subject, actually, another question I get asked a lot is, in urban environments, I mean, I live half the time in Barcelona, and a lot of people I know live in London. It's more difficult to get access to natural light, I find. So if people are struggling to think how to set up their homes or how to maximize the light that they can bring into their homes and environment, or even their workplace, how do you suggest they do that? Are there any strategies that they can implement that will maximize the little light that they're getting into their homes?
Absolutely, there are. So the first thing is to make sure that when you are having your breakfast or kind of position your table, I often see people with their sofa with their back against the window. It's like, this isn't, use your window like the most sort of precious thing in your world. If you're lucky enough to have a window, then really make sure you get close to it. And I mean, that you're there in Barcelona, so I imagine that there are times when it's just really too hot to be anywhere near a window, or you need to put blinds up. So use the daylight at times when you can, and that's early morning and late evening. So that would be my first thing, is to harness that window. And there are some really lovely blinds now which allow you, or kind of curtains. In fact, there are some sort of essentially expanding curtain poles which you can pop into if you rent a flat or a little home. You can use essentially net curtain but it's an expanding rod which will fit into pretty much any window enclosure to reduce the amount of glare and kind of cut down on that brightness and also increase privacy without reducing your exposure to that kind of mood enhancing connection with the day and the clouds and stuff. So that would be the first thing. I think the second thing is to make sure that the windows are clean. You can the amount of, the amount of light coming through is massively reduced, and actually it feels a bit grim when it's grubby. So
Yeah.
that's the second thing you can do. And the third thing is looking at, as I mentioned before, the the reflectance of the surfaces around the window. So kind of, if you've got a little room and you can have a mirror at the other end, so you just kind of get the stuff coming in and bouncing around as much as you can. If you've got reveal on the window, so kind of those bits that come out of the side of the window, see what happens if you paint those in a more reflective paint color, and that will just kind of, anything that's coming in will just kind of help it to shimmer a bit more. So and I've got little crystals on my window, just ways of celebrating natural light. I think I'm just going to put in a word for nighttime, because darkness is as important as daylight, and the number of people that where the curtains either don't black out, or they don't cover the window correctly, or they've got lots of little sort of standby lights glowing in their rooms, and it needs to be dark in order for your brain to get the contrast between day and night. So that would be something else to consider.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Thank you. It's funny actually. I feel that people do forget that. And actually at the moment they've changed the street lights outside of where my flat is, and it's suddenly gone ding, like 10 times of light. So I've literally changed my curtains myself to like even more blackout ones, because the other ones before were kind of still letting a little bit of light around the seams. Yeah, and it does make a massive difference. I was noticing that even with a tiny bit of light coming around the seams, I was still waking up like, 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning.
No, it's also that you're a little bit of your eyes at night, a bit like if you've ever lain awake and heard some kind of, you thought someone was kind of clambering up the stairs, and it was only some small squeaky something. Your brain it's got a threshold, so the dial goes up. So a small amount of light at night is exponentially more disruptive than that same amount of light during the day. So you might find the same with scent or with food or any other stimulus. Your dials shift across the course of the day. So that will be why that's really not helping. But also, I mean, what I do when I'm traveling is I just take along an eye mask. There are some lovely, soft, cute ones that you can use. And that is another way to just kind of make sure that that it's properly dark, even if you have a partner who gets up early, or you've got kids around or whatever. Protect the darkness for yourself.
Yeah, great tip. Thank you. And also, just before we move off that subject, so sitting in front of your window, does that have the same effect as if you're sitting completely outside? I always wonder whether, I don't know, the window does something to the light, basically, so that then your body doesn't benefit from it in the same way.
It's better than, windows are great. They're better than nothing. Loads more light. It's free. You get that dynamic quality. You get all the effects of that connection with nature. But windows are engineered to cut out ultraviolet light, for example. So there's a bunch of, and infrared light doesn't get in really either. So there are all the edges like are orange, and that kind of loads of other stuff that just doesn't come through the filtering process of, plus, your windows might be a bit grimy, so there's a bunch of stuff which isn't getting through. So it's not the same. And the other thing that happens indoors compared to outdoors is that when you're outside, the front of your eye, you might not realize it unless you go out and have a notice, is it's actually really sensitive, and it's got lots of nerve endings on there. And a little bit of being outside not only makes you kind of focus at different distances, like giving your eyeballs a workout, but also the passage of air across your eyes make you blink more often, which hydrates your eyes, and it actually creates a more kind of, it's like taking some deep breaths for your eyeballs. It's really lovely and rinsing. So outdoors, you're getting more wavelengths, you're getting more brightness, and you're also getting a stimulus to relax and rinse your eyes that you're not getting indoors.
That's super interesting. And like going back to like interior design and what we can do in our homes, have you seen any trends beginning to happen at the moment? Is there anything coming in lighting design that we should know about? I hear sometimes about circadian lighting or circadian rhythm lighting. I've probably got that wrong. But are there any trends coming that we should be aware of?
Yes. I think that circadian piece is the way that lighting, you can install lighting in your home, which changes across the course of the day and into the evening. But really, for most of us who have an active life, or you might go outside to get to the shops, or there might be some things that you do in the day. So most circadian lighting is most effective, or is really engineered for hospitals and spaces where people really or even schools where people are sort of stuck there for quite a long time at a stretch. Offices with very deep foot plates where that kind of dynamic quality is going to make a big difference to somebody's ability to kind of focus and be productive. Office, sort of bigger institutional spaces are best for that. For you and I, in a regular home or a home office, the main thing you can do is to kind of create zones in your home, which are going to kind of evoke different kinds of behaviors and kinds of activities. So if you think about circadian lighting, you think about creating zones which are kind of wake up zones and breakfast productivity zones. And here we're seeing more and more lights or task lights which deliver good bright, I've got an example here, good bright controllable light that's really nice, and the miniaturization and increased control and increased spectral distribution, so lights which are closer and closer to daylight. I think those are the things that are really interesting. So that's the first thing about kind of zoning and the ability of different kinds of lights to create different kinds of zones very well. I think the next thing is to do with miniaturization I mentioned earlier. So not only sort of beautifully engineered tiny luminaires which allow you to kind of pop them into spaces which you couldn't have done before. More and more interest among the good companies in kind of sustainability and retrofit. So there's something called the Eco Design Directive, which suggests that, I think it's got a while to come before it comes in, but you look out for that logo, because it means that the things that you buy need to be engineered in such a way that a regular person like you and I could retrofit the bits which break. So the goal is to create things where, in the same way that you used to have a light bulb and just kind of a light with a light bulb in it, and that was a nice, relatively straightforward way of keeping the kind of housing and just changing the bit. A lot of lights now, LED lights now, it's all built in, so you don't have any way of, if a bit breaks, the whole thing breaks. And the next generation is going to say, right, the LED chip or the transformer, those are the main things that break. You must be able to change those out. So that's the next bit, I think, the kind of the sustainability piece, and also making sure that luminaires, particularly for outside, are designed to minimize disruption to people and plants, really. So I think that's something else that's really exciting, is this kind of dark sky enabled lighting because cuts pollinators by half, let alone you and I trying to sleep. So I think that's something else really to look out for, is much more environmentally sensitive, innovative luminaires for us all.
Wow, that's fantastic. Actually, that's fascinating. I'd love to know more about the kind of dark skies concept, because I mean, we're invaded by light pollution so much these days. It's impossible to kind of really get a totally dark environment. I was out in the countryside the other week, which was lovely, and it was the first time in years that I'd actually managed to see all the stars without being kind of invaded by a street light somewhere. And it's, you don't think so much about the effect that it must be having on animals.
Massive. So there's a wonderful there's a Commission for Dark Skies, and they've got a website with some kind of a product guide. Feel free to check that out, and it's really interesting. There are people like Bug Life, there are a bunch of other sort of related, and there are dark sky reserves. I'm on the Jurassic Coast, and there's a part here, Cranbourne Chain Swiss is a national dark sky reserve. So more and more interest in how we can make it almost, it's a tourist attraction actually, to go somewhere where you can actually see the stars and feel that quiet of the night. So I recommend it. 30% of light is at night is wasted in light pollution. So that's a massive saving in terms of our sort of energy use as well. So check that one out.
I will do indeed. Thank you for that tip. That's great. So we just spoke about your books briefly. Would you remind us what the titles are, please? And also, can you tell us a little bit about how we can find your work and what you're working on at the moment, or anything exciting that we should be following you on right now?
Okay, well, thank you very much for that opportunity. So this one is Light Parents Guide. So this really was the first one I wrote, and it's aimed at parents. It's full of information about toddlers and teens and stuff. And then this one is really designed more for people like you and I who work maybe from home, or the home office. It's got stuff about hybrid working. It's got stuff about all of that. And that's you'll find that on Amazon. So if you just put Dr. Shirley James, you'll see it should pop up. And so, but also I'm most active on LinkedIn. And so you'll, just find me and get in touch, because I'm always keen to hear people's stories and what they're interested in. So that's probably, I've also got a website, ageoflightinnovations.com.
And did you have a course? Were you telling me about a course that you were preparing earlier?
Yeah, so I've been doing more and more CPDs with architects and others, and actually the next CPD course, I'm just updating that to work with the LIA. So for now, if you can just reach out to me, I'll let you know as soon as that one's ready. I'm also working on, as you are, Charlie, I'm a WELL advisor, and I'm on the WELL faculty. So working with the WELL to create some modules for them about the light concept at WELL, because when I went through my training, and I think it's still the case, there wasn't really anything which explained the science behind the features, and it helps people to interpret them in a more thoughtful and creative way than just kind of ticking a box. So that's something else to look out for.
Brilliant. I can't wait to read that. That would be fascinating. Yeah, I think you're right. And I'm trying to remember back to my training now. But yeah, I don't think there was a whole load on how it physically affected us necessarily. A little bit, but yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been fascinating talking to you, and really nice to see you and chat with you again, because I know we've met a few times through WELL on the circuit, as you call it. But it's really, really nice to have like an in-depth chat with you and hear more about, how light is really affecting our bodies and what we can do about it, because I know people are becoming much more interested in it, really. So let's hope that just increases. But yeah, thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Healthy Home Show. If you like what you heard, please press subscribe or follow the show. And if there's anything you'd like to know more about, or if you have any specific unhealthy home issues, I'd love to hear from you. So please send me a DM over on Instagram. You'll find me at The Healthy Home Therapist, or over on LinkedIn at Charlie Lemmer. Stay healthy, and I'll see you soon.